The sun had already climbed high over Silver Mesa, painting the wooden stalls and tin roofs in a hard, honest light that left nothing to hide. The market hummed with life, merchants calling prices, children darting between legs, horses stamped and swished, the smell of frying fat and roasted corn riding the wind. Eli Harper tied his horse to the trough and stepped down, boots thudding on the packed earth, a pocket of silver coins jangling faintly against his belt. He had come for meat, a simple thing, necessary to fill the larder and keep his house quiet at night for once. He tightened his coat against the breeze and walked between stalls, counting the coins in his head and thinking of bread and of his sister's cough back home. He had never been a man for crowds, the market crowded him, but need had decided his route today. The butcher had a side of beef hanging on a chain, fat gleaming like pale moonlight, his apprentice hacking at marrow bones as if the world had no mercy left. Eli stepped closer, fingers already reaching for his purse, when the sound of a trader's shout drew him away. Not another price, not a bargain, but a bark that cut the morning like a knife, half price. Last chance, take her or I'll send her to the fort. At first Eli thought the man was selling livestock, greed sent men to sell cows, mules, broken wagons. But the words drew his head and then his eyes, and he saw the shape beside the cart, a woman, hands tied, eyes proud even though the dust clung to her like a poor cloak. Her hair was long and dark, tied back in a simple braid that had been disturbed by travel. Her dress was plain and patched, but she carried herself with a dignity no price could buy. Around her men clustered, spitting jokes and worsted remarks, and a few faces in the crowd leaned in, curious about the spectacle. The trader, big, greasy, the kind of man who smelled of coin and old lies, shouted again, and the crowd laughed, a low cruel music that made Eli's shoulders tighten. The woman watched them all with the steadiness of someone who had seen worse and decided not to bend. Eli felt something inside him move, a small, sharp thing like an old regret. He walked toward them. Untie her, he said when he reached the trader, voice low but steady. The man smirked. You buying, cowboy, she's cheap, make me a better offer. Eli's hand went to his pocket and pulled out the coins he'd counted for meat, every small piece. He set them on the dirt at the trader's boot. Not buying, he said. Paying for what's right. For the briefest moment the market held its breath. Greed is a quick teacher. The trader bent, scooped the coins, and spat the idea of pity like he spat tobacco. He cut the ropes from the woman's wrists with a knife already warm with use. She did not move at first, simply rubbed her skin where the rope had bitten it and blinked like a person waking from a kind of sleep. Eli stepped to her side and offered his hand. Her fingers closed on his with the slight pressure of someone who has been taught to hold herself steady. The touch said nothing, but it said enough. He bowed his head. You free now, he told her simply. She gave a small, suspicious tilt of her head and then words came, few and halting, English folded around Apache sounds like cloth over a wound. Name, Ayanna, she whispered. Widowed. The word dropped between them heavy with stories. Eli told her his name in return and motioned for a wagon he'd seen near a cobbler's stall. He didn't intend to bring her to his ranch, not at first. He intended to buy meat and cross the trail back home. But the woman's dark eyes held a quiet the world had not taught him to ignore, and when she looked at the trading post, at the men who had called her a thing to be bartered, whatever small. Hard part remained in him cracked open. He asked a few questions, where she came from, what had happened, and the answers curled like dry leaves. Raiders, losing a husband to fever, being taken in by a man who had cruel plans, forced into selling because debts bite harder than knives. The sky above them was bright in an ordinary blue, and within that clear day Eli felt the ordinary thing of being small confronted by the need to act. He helped Ayanna onto the wagon, set his hat over a hand to keep the sun out of his eyes, and led his horse. When he should have been counting the pieces of meat he'd buy, he found instead that his sack held a small cloth bundle of bread and the map of a new path he didn't yet understand. The ride back to his ranch was long and quiet save for the thump of hooves. Ayanna sat wrapped in an old shawl, hands folded, watching the world go by like someone reading a new book page by page. Eli watched her, too, thinking of his own house, how quiet it had been since his brother left, since the cough took his neighbor's girl. He thought of his small pantry and decided in a quiet way that a mouth that had not been given a choice deserved shelter more than his own need for meat. When they arrived, his homestead looked small and honest in the late light. The house, a single-story cottage of pale wood, held the smell of warm flour and a curtain that never quite erased the afternoon breeze. Eli's sister came out, Maria, and her face softened when she saw the stranger. "Who is she?" she asked. Ayanna rose, the sun catching the line of her cheekbones, and bowed with a dignity that didn't need words. "Ayanna," she said, they would sell me." Maria's hands flew to her apron, eyes widening with the kind of anger a woman knows when a man thinks he owns another. She moved without asking, leading Ayanna inside, setting water to boil like a prayer. The children in the yard peered from behind fences, curiosity sharper than fear. Ayanna's steps were careful at first, then quickened as the warmth of a hearth found its way into the cold of her bones. Eli watched from the porch, the sun behind him like an old coin. That night, by lamplight, they ate bread and beans beside a small table crowded with second chances. Ayanna's hands, when she began to speak, were slow at first, then sure as she told them in broken English about the wandering wagon where the trader had taken her from a camp 3 dusty valleys away. Her story carried weight, the kind that cannot be skipped or sewn over, a grief that had holes, but also a stubbornness that would not be sold. She had been a baker's apprentice once, her fingers skilled in shaping dough into small moons. Eli listened, thinking that fate had a way of putting an oven near a man who needed bread. He told her of the land he tended, the well that barely held water, the corral that had once held 100 head but now only a handful. He told her of the little girl next door who had no mother, of nights when the house felt too big and empty. Ayanna's eyes softened. This was not mercy given but a trade of souls, heaving him a small, complex gift of trust without asking for anything in return. The next morning the market's memory pressed on Eli like a weight that had to be shed. The other traders saw Ayanna through the window and smirked, but no one had the courage to approach after the trader's money had been tossed on the dirt. Eli set her to work gently. There were small things to do: sweep the porch, feed hens, mend a torn shirt. She worked with the patience of someone making things right again, hands sure where they had been unsure before. Within a week she had coaxed a new rhythm from the kitchen. The smell of yeast turned the cottage brighter than the lamplight ever could. Her bread became something the neighbors spoke of in undertones, marveling how a woman with a story of chains could turn flour into comfort. As Ayanna settled, the ranch took breath. The hens laid with less worry, the cow calmed, even the small dog at the gate began to wag a tail more often. But life on the plains is never simple for long. Word travels like dry fire. A trader who loses profit speaks louder than a person who finds a new home. Men with sharper tongues and less patience began to mutter at the market. "Harper takes in a wetback," one drawled, another said, "he buys trouble with his spare coins." Their words tried to corner the season, make it smaller, but the warmth of the hearth did what words could not. One afternoon a rider arrived, dust clouding his heels, hat low. He carried a letter from a man in a town 2 ridges over, an old creditor, a man with a ledger scarred with numbers and a face that never forgot a debt. He'd heard rumors that a woman had been bought in the market and spread the tale that Eli had sheltered stolen property. Trouble, it seemed, could smell safety like smoke. When Eli read the letter he felt the old pull in the chest: make peace, pay what you owe, keep your place. But the ledger did not know Ayanna's hunger, nor the set of her jaw when she rose from the table to feed a child. The creditor came to the gate with 2 hired men like gray wolves, polite at first, then not. He accused Eli of harboring a person stolen from lawful sale. He threatened fines in the law's long reach. Eli stood his ground. He had no silver to bribe them with and no paper to prove his righteousness. He had only the bread on his table and the faces of people who now called his house safe. Ayanna, when the men spoke in clipped, dangerous English, stepped forward. Her voice, clear, low, reached across the yard like a bell. She spoke of her husband who had died of fever, of the men who had taken advantage of a widow, of how she had been brought to the wagon and prodded like livestock. Her words did not ask for pity. They asked only to be heard. The hired men shifted beneath the truth of her sentences. The creditor fumed and muttered of laws that favored coin over human dignity. Eli finally put down his hands and spoke with the quiet that had made him a man people listened to. If the law wants proof that you own another person, show it. If you own a marriage, show it. Until then, I'll keep my door open and my hearth hot. If you take her away past my gate, you do it through me. For a long breath they measured him, 2 hired men, a ledger, and a village of wary eyes against one man who had chosen to cross money with justice. The creditor, smelling the wind was not in his favor, drew back. He left, not with honor but with the knowledge that sometimes a ledger is less than a life. That night the neighbors' talk softened into a cautious respect. People came with potatoes, a jar of jam, a bit of sugar, small offerings to the woman who had been freed and to the man who had freed her. Ayanna worked fiercely, but she also watched the land like a woman who had learned to map the rhythms of another world. She taught Eli's sister how to fold dough for biscuits that rose like small suns. She patched shirts with stitches that would not split. She hummed songs from her childhood that hung in the kitchen like a second kind of spice. Her presence altered even the children. Where Ben had been shy, he now bounded into the yard to see if there would be bread today, and when Ayanna would pull out a small strip of dough and fold it into a star for him, some of the old dark around his life eased. Months warmed into a season of harvest and small celebrations. The ranch repaired from roof to fence, not because Eli had more money but because a woman's hands had taught them economy and patience. Ayanna never spoke of marriage at first. The memory of being sold had carved a caution into her bones that would not be easy to mend. She moved like a person who trusted slowly, and when she laughed it was like spring arriving late, an event everyone savored. Eli found himself staying later in the kitchen than before. He found excuses to repair a gate or cut a longer stack of wood because it gave him the chance to stand where the light fell over her hair. Sometimes he would catch himself watching the way she tilted her head when she measured salt for bread, thinking how the world had been unfair and how he had not planned to answer unfairness with anything but simple bread. One evening, after a long, hard day, when the sun rode its final notes across the plains, a wagon rolled onto the lane bearing a traveler covered in dust and worry. He carried news. The trader who had tried to sell Ayanna had been arrested in the next county for trafficking and cruelty. The law had finally caught up with a man who thought himself untouchable. The village gathered, some judged, some relieved, and that night the tavern's laughter grew honest and loud for the first time in months. With that, the old scare of being hunted drifted a little farther from the ranch. Ayanna's shoulders dropped in a way they hadn't before. She slept deeper, her face untroubled by dreams of ropes. In the winter that followed they had a small bounty. The cow calved, giving them a new calf to warm a cold morning. The corn came up thicker than the year before. Eli taught Ayanna to ride. She laughed at her first clumsy attempts and then, like everything else she touched, became almost graceful. One day, while they mended fences beneath an autumn sky the color of old paper, Ayanna paused and said, simply, "I do not forget." Eli nodded. "None of us does." She looked at him, eyes searching the kind of man whose past had been rough but whose present was a steady place. "You gave me place," she said. "You did not buy me. You gave." He could have answered with a boast or a jest, but he found that words were small and inadequate beside the quiet fact of how lives can shift. He reached for her hand and did not take it like a claim but like a promise. Seasons turned, and the story of the market stayed with them. The day Eli Harper had gone for meat and come back bearing a life no number could measure. People still spoke of chance and choices. Some said that a man who tosses coins on the dirt will always find the wind changes his pocket. Ayanna grew into the land like a new plant, roots finding water in the most unlikely seams. She taught children to shape pastry, to listen to the weather, to mend a frayed rope in the way that gave it a second life. She kept the house warm and fed neighbors when they were sick. Eli, who had once lived only for chores and ledgers and the dull ache of silent rooms, learned how to hear laughter as a thing to chase rather than fear. In a year that tasted of everything a world could ask for, hard work, small triumphs, and the mercies of everyday bread, Ayanna stood at the door and watched the market beyond the lane, the place where men's greed once bleached hope. She thought of the trader's cart and of how she had been near to being counted and sold. She thought of the man who had offered silver and warmth instead of another sale. She thought of the lamplight and the way the house no longer felt hollow. The day came when a neighbor asked Ayanna if she'd ever go back to her people, if she would remain on Eli's land for good. She smiled, slow and sure. "My feet remember a road," she said, "but my hands remember bread." Then she turned, walked into the kitchen, and took up a bowl to knead. The neighbor left with a quiet in her step. Love, when it arrives, is not always a trumpet or a marriage. Sometimes it is a stubborn patch on a roof, a loaf of bread shared between a table of hands, a child who finally learns to laugh without an edge. Eli and Ayanna did not marry like two shining heroes in the novels folks sometimes read by lamplight. They married with the small, steady promises of shared chores and watchful nights. People came, neighbors in coats, the children who had grown up beside their hearth, because the law of community is not only in contracts but in who stands when the wind comes. The trader's jail sentence came as a footnote in the local paper. The market moved on with its shouts and bargains. But on Eli's porch, in a house warmed by music and bread and the slow rhythm of hands that know one another, a family settled into a peace that had cost a handful of coins and gained a life. And somewhere, out beyond the field where the wheat bent its head in honor to a small, brave woman, the sun still rose in the same steady way, only now it rose on a home where the word, free, had been earned and given back with dignity.